It always starts the same way. She looks at you like you're the answer to something she's been searching for her whole life. Her eyes light up. She laughs a little too easily at your jokes. She leans in when you talk. And somewhere deep in your chest, you feel it, that warm, electric certainty, that this one is different, that she actually gets you, that finally, after everything, someone sees you for who you really are. And that feeling is the trap. Because here's what Carl Jung discovered after decades of studying the deepest layers of the human mind. Layers most people never even know exist. When a woman looks at you like that, chances are she isn't seeing you at all. She's seeing a projection. A fantasy she's been constructing since childhood, piece by piece, built from every story she was told, every wound she never healed, every longing she never admitted out loud. And the moment you walked into the room, something in her unconscious mind whispered, "Him. He's the one. He fits the image." But the image was never you. Jung called this internal image the animus. It's the masculine figure that lives in every woman's unconscious, a psychological archetype, a template of what a man should be. And it isn't rational, it isn't fair. It doesn't care about your actual personality, your values, your history, or who you are when nobody's watching. The animus is emotional, mythological, primal. It's the hero, the father, the lover, the savior, all collapsed into one impossible figure. And without her even realizing it, she projects that figure onto real men, onto you. This is why she can meet you on a Tuesday and feel like she's known you forever. This is why she'll describe you to her friends using words that barely sound like the person you know yourself to be. This is why she falls so fast, so hard, so completely, because she isn't falling for you. She's falling for the character, the role, the fantasy version of you that fits perfectly into the story she's been writing in her unconscious since she was a little girl. And you fall for it too, because being seen that intensely feels incredible. It feels like validation, like proof that you matter. She says, you're different from other guys, and you believe her, because God, you want to believe her. You think being wanted means being known. You think being chosen means being understood. You walk right into the movie she's casting, and you start playing the part. The problem is, you never read the script. Jung wasn't a cynic. He wasn't bitter. He wasn't writing in a dark room somewhere with a grudge against women. He was one of the most profound psychologists who ever lived, and he spent his entire career staring into the abyss of human relationships with ruthless intellectual honesty. And what he found wasn't comfortable. He found that this kind of projection, animus projection, is one of the most powerful and most destructive forces in romantic relationships. Not because women are manipulative, but because the projection is unconscious. She doesn't know she's doing it, and neither do you. That's what makes it so dangerous. Think about how this actually plays out. In the beginning, everything feels electric because you're mirroring back everything she needs to believe about you. Or rather, you're not contradicting her fantasy yet. You're new. You're a blank canvas, and she's already painting a masterpiece on you. Every conversation, she's filling in the details. Every moment you spend together, the illusion gets richer, more detailed, more real to her. She's not building a relationship with you. She's building a relationship with the projection. And then, slowly, inevitably, reality starts showing through. You have a bad day. You disagree about something that matters. You fail to read her mind in the exact way her ideal man would have. You say the wrong thing, or you don't say anything, and the silence lands wrong. And something shifts in her eyes. Not because you did anything catastrophically wrong, not because you lied or betrayed her, but because for a split second you stopped fitting the role. The real you peeked through the projection, and the projection doesn't like competition. This is the moment most men spend years trying to understand. The confusion that follows a relationship falling apart when you thought everything was going so well. The shame spiral of asking yourself what you did wrong, what you should have said differently, how you could have been better. But Jung's work points to something that cuts right through all of that confusion. You didn't fail her. The projection failed her because you were never going to be able to sustain something that was never real to begin with. Here is the truth most men spend their entire lives running from. She wasn't in love with you. She was in love with the idea of you. And those are two entirely different things. One is a relationship. The other is a performance with an audience of one. The question Jung forces you to ask, the question that changes everything, isn't, why didn't she love me? It's this: did you ever actually show her who you really are? Or did you spend the whole time trying to keep fitting the part, bending yourself into the shape she needed, holding the costume in place with both hands because the applause felt too good to walk away from? That's where we go next. Because what happens when the projection takes over completely? When it stops being romantic and starts being something Jung called something far darker? That's the part nobody warns you about. You already know something is wrong. You can feel it. The woman who looked at you like you were the answer to everything has started looking at you like you're the source of everything that's broken. The warmth is gone. In its place, criticism that comes out of nowhere. Arguments that don't make logical sense. A cold, moral certainty in her voice that feels less like a person talking and more like a verdict being read. You keep trying to figure out what changed. You keep replaying conversations, looking for the moment you lost her. But here's what Jung would tell you straight to your face. You didn't lose her. You never had her. What you had was the projection. And now the projection has turned. This is the part of Jung's work that almost nobody talks about. Not because it isn't real, but because it's deeply uncomfortable, and the culture we live in has no language for it. Jung called it animus possession, and it is, by any honest measure, one of the most destructive psychological forces that can move through a relationship. Here's how it works. Every woman carries an animus, that unconscious inner masculine image we talked about in the first block. When it's integrated, when a woman has done genuine psychological work on herself, the animus becomes a source of strength. It gives her clarity, decisiveness, creative fire. But when it isn't integrated, when a woman has never examined it, challenged it, or taken responsibility for it, the animus doesn't stay quiet. It takes over. And when it does, it doesn't speak with her voice. It speaks with the voice of absolute authority. You've heard that voice. You know exactly what it sounds like. It's the voice that makes pronouncements instead of observations. It's the voice that is never wrong, never uncertain, never willing to consider another perspective. It's the voice that turns every disagreement into a moral failing on your part. It's the voice that can take something you said 3 weeks ago and reconstruct it into evidence of a character flaw you didn't know you had. It feels righteous. It feels certain. It feels like truth. But Jung was very clear. It isn't truth. It's possession. It's a woman's unconscious masculine archetype speaking through her, unchecked and unexamined, hijacking her perception of reality and replacing it with something that serves the shadow. And here is the brutal detail that changes everything. She believes it completely. That's what makes it possession rather than simply a bad argument. She isn't lying to you. She isn't consciously manipulating you. She genuinely cannot see the gap between the projection and the reality because the animus has collapsed that gap for her. You are no longer a man she's in a relationship with. You are a character in a psychological drama happening entirely inside her unconscious. You've been cast as the villain. And no amount of logic, patience, or genuine love is going to rewrite that script from the outside. Jung described the possessed animus as functioning like a hidden prosecutor. It collects evidence, it builds cases, it waits, and then it delivers judgment with the full emotional weight of absolute conviction. The man on the receiving end of that judgment doesn't know what hit him. He thought he was in a relationship. He finds himself in a trial, and the verdict was written before he ever opened his mouth. This is where men get destroyed. Not in the obvious ways, but in the slow, grinding, invisible ways. You start walking on eggshells. You start editing yourself before you speak, running every thought through a filter that asks, will this set her off? You start apologizing for things you didn't do, taking responsibility for emotional weather you didn't create, because at some point the path of least resistance starts to look like the only path available. You tell yourself, this is love. You tell yourself this is partnership. You tell yourself that if you're just patient enough, understanding enough, present enough, she'll come back. The real her will come back. But Jung's work asks a harder question. What if the real her is someone who has never confronted this force inside herself? What if the woman you fell for was partly real and partly the version of herself she projects when the animus is quiet, when the fantasy is still intact and the projection is still holding? Because the animus doesn't possess her constantly. That's the cruelest part. It comes and goes. And in the spaces between, she can be warm, open, perceptive, deeply loving. Those moments feel like proof that you're not crazy, that what you had was real. And you hold on to those moments like a lifeline. You use them to justify enduring the rest. That cycle, the warmth, then the possession, then the warmth again, is not a relationship. It's a psychological trap. And the longer you stay inside it without understanding what's actually happening, the more of yourself you lose. Not dramatically, not all at once, piece by piece, your confidence, your sense of reality, your willingness to trust your own perception of events. You start to wonder if maybe she's right. Maybe you are the problem. Maybe you are as selfish, as cold, as emotionally unavailable as the voice says you are. That doubt, that creeping, corrosive self-doubt, is exactly what the unintegrated animus produces in the men who encounter it. Jung saw it clearly. He documented it. He warned about it. Not to demonize women, but to name something real that was causing enormous damage to real people in real relationships. Because here is the thing about darkness. It doesn't lose its power when you ignore it. It gains power. The animus that goes unexamined doesn't stay still. It grows. It gets louder. It gets more certain. And it pulls the woman further and further from the reality of who you actually are, replacing you with a shadow figure she can pour all of her unresolved pain into. You cannot fix this from the outside. You cannot love her through it. You cannot argue your way out of a projection. The only thing you can control is whether you understand what's happening clearly enough to stop losing yourself inside it. And that understanding, that moment of clear, unflinching recognition, is where the next question becomes unavoidable. Because if she is possessed by something she hasn't faced, what are you possessed by? What is it inside you that keeps you standing in the fire, telling yourself it's warmth? That's what Block 3 is about. Let's stop talking about her for a minute, because everything you just read about projection, about the animus, about possession, none of it explains the part you played. And you did play a part. Not because you're weak, not because you're broken, but because nobody ever taught you to see the trap before you walked into it. Jung's work isn't just a lens for understanding women, it's a mirror. And right now, that mirror is pointed directly at you. Here's the question Jung would ask if he were sitting across from you right now. Not, why did she do this to you? But why did you let it continue? Why did you keep performing? Why did you keep bending? Why did you swallow your truth, edit your instincts, shrink your boundaries, and call it love? When somewhere deep down, something in you always knew it wasn't right. The answer isn't simple, but it starts in a place most men never look. Jung believed that just as every woman carries an unconscious masculine image, the animus, every man carries an unconscious feminine image. He called it the anima. And the anima isn't just a romantic ideal, it's the part of you that hungers for connection, for warmth, for being truly seen and accepted by another person. In healthy form, the anima is what gives a man emotional depth, intuition, the capacity for genuine love. But when it's underdeveloped, when it's been buried under years of being told that needing connection is weakness, the anima becomes desperate. It latches onto the first woman who seems to offer what it's starving for, and it will pay almost any price to keep that feeling alive. This is why you stayed. This is why you kept performing. Not because you were fooled, because you were hungry. And she, or rather, the projection she was offering, looked like food. Think about the moment you first felt that pull. The way she made you feel seen. Even if what she was actually seeing was a fantasy version of you. It didn't matter. It felt real. And for a man who has spent years disconnected from his own emotional depth, that feeling isn't just pleasant, it's intoxicating. It becomes the thing you organize your life around. You start making decisions not based on what's true for you, but based on what keeps that feeling alive. You say yes when you mean no. You laugh when something hurts. You perform patience you don't feel because the alternative, her pulling away, that warmth disappearing, feels unbearable. Jung had a word for what you become in that state. He called it a man without a center. A man whose identity is no longer rooted in himself, but in the reflection he gets from someone else. And a man without a center isn't in a relationship. He's in a performance. Every morning he wakes up and puts on the costume. Every conversation is a calculated act of self-management designed to keep the audience satisfied. He's not showing up as himself. He's showing up as whoever he needs to be to avoid losing access to the feeling she represents. And here's where it gets dark. The more you perform, the more invisible you become. Not to her, to yourself. Every time you suppress an instinct to keep the peace, you send yourself a message. Every time you apologize for something you didn't do wrong, you erode your own sense of reality. Every time you make yourself smaller to fit the shape she needs, you forget a little more about the shape you actually are. It doesn't happen dramatically. There's no single moment where you cross a line. It's cumulative, incremental, almost invisible, until one day you're standing in the middle of your own life and you don't recognize the man living it. Jung called this process the loss of soul. Not in a religious sense, in a psychological one. The genuine self, the living core of who you are, gets buried under so many layers of performance that it stops sending signals. You stop knowing what you actually want. You stop trusting your own perceptions. You stop being able to tell the difference between what you feel and what you've been conditioned to feel safe expressing. And in that hollowed-out state, you become completely dependent on her for your sense of reality. Which means the more she falls into animus possession, the more completely her distorted version of you becomes the only version you can see. This is the trap in its final form. She's possessed by a shadow that has replaced you with a projection. You're possessed by a hunger that has replaced yourself with a performance, and the two of you are locked together in a closed system, each one feeding the other's unconscious dynamic. For love, when what you're actually doing is fighting to avoid the one thing that terrifies you more than losing her. Being alone with yourself, because that's the real fear underneath all of it. Not losing her specifically, losing the feeling she provides, losing the external source of validation that tells you you're enough, you're worthy, you matter. The prospect of sitting in silence without that reflection, without someone to perform for, without someone whose approval confirms your existence, feels like falling into a void. So you stay, you endure. You twist yourself into increasingly unrecognizable shapes, because the void feels worse than the trap. But Jung saw something in that void that most men never discover. He saw that the terror of facing yourself alone, the silence, the emptiness, the confrontation with everything you've been avoiding, isn't the end of something. It's the beginning. The beginning of the only journey that actually changes anything. He called it individuation. And it doesn't start when you find the right woman. It doesn't start when the relationship improves. It starts the moment you stop running from yourself and turn around to face what's there. That moment, that terrifying, necessary, life-altering moment, is exactly where we're going in the final block. So here you are, you've seen the projection, you've felt the possession, you've recognized the trap, and if you've been honest with yourself through all of it, genuinely, uncomfortably honest, then something has already started to shift. Not because the pain is gone, but because you're finally looking at it clearly instead of through the fog of fantasy and performance. And that clarity, as brutal as it feels, is the first real thing that has happened in a long time. Jung called what comes next individuation. And before you dismiss that word as academic, as abstract, as something that belongs in a psychology textbook rather than your actual life, understand what it means in practice. Individuation is the process of becoming fully yourself, not the self you perform for approval, not the self you constructed to fit someone else's projection, not the hollowed-out version that survived years of bending and shrinking and calling it love. The actual self, the one that was there before you started performing, the one that got buried so gradually you forgot it existed. This is not a self-help concept. Jung didn't sell it with optimism or 5-step programs. He described it as brutal. He called it a death before death. Because what has to happen first, before anything real can grow, is that the false selves have to burn. Every mask you've been wearing, every role you've been playing, every story you've been telling yourself about who you need to be to deserve love, all of it has to go, and that process is not comfortable. It is not quick. It does not feel like progress while it's happening. It feels like loss. Because it is loss. You are losing the only version of yourself you've known how to be. But here's what Jung understood that almost nobody else was willing to say. The man who refuses that loss, the man who keeps the masks in place, keeps performing, keeps chasing validation from women who are projecting onto him. That man never gets free. He just gets more sophisticated at the performance. He finds new audiences, new relationships, new women who offer that intoxicating feeling of being chosen. And the cycle starts again. A little older each time, a little more defended, a little more confused about why it keeps ending the same way. Individuation breaks the cycle. Not by making you better at relationships, but by making you whole enough that you stop needing relationships to make you whole. This is the part that sounds paradoxical until you live it. The man who has done genuine psychological work on himself, who has sat in the silence long enough for the illusions to fall apart, who has faced his shadow, who has integrated his anima instead of being enslaved by it. That man carries something different when he walks into a room. Not arrogance, not coldness, not the performed confidence of a man who has read the right books and memorized the right moves. Something quieter than that. Something rooted. A stillness that doesn't need to announce itself because it doesn't need anything from you at all. And here's the thing Jung observed that will rearrange something in your chest if you let it land. That man, the grounded, integrated, genuinely individuated man, doesn't attract projection the way a hollow man does, because projection requires a blank canvas. It requires emptiness to fill. When a man is fully present in himself, when he has a real center and genuine boundaries and an identity that isn't for sale, there is nothing for the animus to latch onto. The fantasy has nowhere to land. What's left is reality, and reality for the first time has a chance. This means the work of individuation isn't just about you. It changes the entire dynamic of every relationship you enter. You stop being cast in roles because you're not auditioning. You stop disappearing inside someone else's fantasy because you're too present in your own reality. You stop attracting women who need a blank canvas and start encountering women who are capable of seeing an actual person, because they've done enough of their own work to want one. But you cannot get there by performing it. You cannot fake groundedness. You cannot read about individuation and decide you're individuated. The work is internal, unglamorous, and relentless. It means sitting with the discomfort you've spent years medicating with female approval. It means letting the voice that says you're nothing without her scream as loud as it needs to, and not running from it, not numbing it, not drowning it in the next relationship. It means asking yourself, in genuine silence, who you actually are when nobody is watching and nobody is judging and there is no performance required. Most men never ask that question. Not because they're cowards, but because nobody ever told them the question was available. They were handed a script at birth. Be useful, be strong, be chosen. And they ran that script until it stopped working and then blamed the women who walked away instead of examining the script itself. Jung is asking you to put the script down. Not to become cold, not to become distant, not to build walls or adopt philosophies that turn women into enemies or obstacles, but to become so genuinely, completely, uncomfortably yourself that you no longer need anyone else to tell you who you are. Because when you reach that place, and it is a place you reach through fire, not around it, something extraordinary happens. You stop seeing women as the answer to the emptiness. You stop projecting your own unmet needs onto them the way they were projecting their animus onto you. You start seeing them as they actually are. Human, complex, on their own journey toward their own wholeness. And from that place, something becomes possible that was never possible before. Not the fantasy of being chosen, not the performance of being loved, but actual connection. The kind that doesn't require either person to disappear. The kind where two people who have done the hard work of becoming themselves choose each other not out of hunger or fear or projection, but out of genuine recognition. Jung didn't promise you that would be easy to find. He promised you it was the only thing worth looking for. The question he leaves you with is the same one he spent his entire life asking. Not, will she finally see you? But, have you seen yourself? Because until you can answer that honestly, everything else is just another performance, another projection, another cycle. The work starts now, not with her, with you.